Mark O'Neill. Welcome to Suit Up the Podcast.
Thank you, Terrence. I'm excited to be here, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I am always so excited when I see something like this come up because we're talking To Catch a Spy, which is the much needed sequel to the original David Dodge book, To Catch a Thief. Now, the irony is I'm friends with the last family whose last name is Dodge. So for
Uh-huh.
apparently a number of years, they have a David Dodge in the family. He convinced his youngest siblings that he's the one that wrote To Catch a Thief.
Well, he sounds like a thief a little bit.
It's a little bit the con
That's
artist.
funny. Yeah, that's funny. I can appreciate that though.
Mark, why don't we start off? Would you mind sharing a brief biographical sketch with the audience? Who are you and how did you come to catch a spy?
Okay, so Mark O'Neill, I was born in Jersey City, New Jersey, and I was raised at the Jersey
Mm-hmm.
Shore, Oceanport, Monmouth
Mm-hmm.
Beach. Um, from when I was little, high school, I wanted to be a writer, an author, actually. And I can remember writing things on like little index cards. Remember
Mm-hmm.
those? You used to have to write them out, and laid out chapters. But there was no, back then there was really nothing really to help
Mm-hmm.
you, like resources. You had to find a book if the local store had it. And but now it's totally different. So, but from that, I had to stop my writing back
Mm-hmm.
then because I had to go to college and
Little
learn a
things.
profession. Yeah, life, life, wife, kids, work. But when I was working, I worked for a lot of different places. But for the last, I guess, for 20 years, I worked for a pharmaceutical
Mm-hmm.
company up in New York
Mm-hmm.
City. Loved it. They were so good to me. And while I was there, I wrote a weekly humor column for a local newspaper. And I did that for a few years. That was like in the early 2000s. It was called Sour Gripes. And it was just about things that bothered
Mm-hmm.
me. It was like 2 or 3 paragraphs. So I always wanted to be a writer. And I guess when my wife and I both retired about 5 years ago,
Congratulations.
and thank you. Yeah, we were lucky. We were able to retire early, but I was used to working a lot of
Mm-hmm.
hours, and I was looking for something to
Mm-hmm.
do. And I just thought maybe I could be a writer. So that's kind of how it started. And I had always loved To Catch a Thief. I liked the book. I liked the movie. I mean, I was enraptured with John
Mm-hmm.
Roby. And it really, it really bothered me. It was kind of left
Mm-hmm.
hanging. And I was wondering, like, what happened to them? So,
So, what was your first experience with To Catch a Thief? Was it the film? Was it the
okay.
book? What do you remember?
I'm half Irish and half Italian. So I was at my Italian grandparents' house. This is way back when I think I was maybe 14, 15 years old, maybe even younger. I was in their basement, and they're Italian, so they had a lot of paperback books on a rack. One of them was The Godfather, I think, and one of them was like Shoes of a Fisherman, and wedged in there was To Catch a Thief. So, I borrowed it, and it was like an old paperback. I remember Dell, it was a
Mm-hmm.
Dell 20 paperback, and I read it. Oh my gosh, I was blown away. And then when I realized Hitchcock had made a
Mm-hmm.
film, I watched that, and I've probably read the book a half a dozen times, and I've watched that film maybe 20 times. I love everything about it. I mean, John Roby, if you think about him, he was, so
Mm-hmm.
intriguing. He was a retired jewel thief, not reformed, and he had fought in the resistance. And he was independently wealthy, living in a magnificent villa in the French Riviera. I mean, the guy he was independently wealthy, and he was dating socialites, and you know, um, Francie Stevens or the Grace Kelly character. And the thing I liked about him, Terrence, that a lot maybe people don't fully appreciate. It certainly resonated with me. He could move from socializing with the criminal
Mm-hmm.
element to high society with ease. He was equally comfortable in both, and I just thought that was amazing. That's such a
Mm-hmm.
skill. So I've always loved it, and
I think
you know,
that your method of going about writing a sequel was really great in that we're shifting to the espionage element in this mystery, which again fits really well with who John Roby is, because you are able to
yeah,
integrate all of the his capacity to walk into all situations and scenarios. I know this sounds
yeah,
shocking. I'm a big James Bond fan. So of course I see the title To Catch a Spy and I'm like, wait, this is everything I ever needed in life. But Roby has a similar aspect to Bond in the ability to walk into any situation and have that social grace. And I think the
yes.
with him being a criminal, a high class criminal, is part of what just makes him. He literally has that soft touch with everyone that he talks to.
Yes. Yeah, that's very true. And he at the end of To Catch a Thief, he's a jewel thief. He's a cat burglar. And when I was thinking, where was I going to take this story? I had to think about dramatic elements
Hmm.
for writing, like character arc. Like how does the character grow over the course of a story, and plot. And so for character arc, I reread the original
Hmm.
book a couple of times, and there's just hints of John Roby being a little selfish,
Yes.
just a couple. So I figured, well, that's a great platform to start, a good foundation. Like he could move maybe from selfish to
Hmm.
selfless. And then I thought, well, how do I figure out what the plot would be? And that was easy. I just looked at John Roby's skills. I mean, he was a cat burglar, right? And he had also fought in the resistance. And at the risk of sounding like Liam Neeson in the Taken films, those are very special
Hmm.
skills. So, and then I thought about the time
Hmm.
frame. It was the 1950s, which is kind of a forgotten
Yeah.
decade. But, and there's nothing good about any war.
Hmm.
But what's interesting about the Cold War was it was a lot of individual versus
Yes.
army. And I thought that would play
Hmm.
well. So I thought to move him into the world of espionage. And I mean, I just love it. First of all, if you move a character or characters into that world, plot lines are
Hmm.
endless. You could find a mole, you could protect a mole, like the thief, the spy who came in from the cold,
Hmm.
right? You could try to courier information or intercept information, like Ronin. I mean, you could do this for so many different things, and I just thought the plot lines would be endless, and that would kind of give me a lot of opportunity to show growth in the different characters. So that's kind of how I landed on
And to
that.
your point on John Roby being selfish, that was one of my favorite parts about the setup for this story is he walks into this and he offers to help, but because he has an agenda. And for a character
Yes,
like John Roby, that is so important because it gives him dimensionality. Again, it's he can do
yes.
the right thing and he's always happy to do the right thing. But especially at the beginning of the book, he's very happy to do the right thing if he can get something out of it.
Yes, yes. I'm so glad you caught that, because that, to me, the best heroes, the best protagonists, whether it's books or film, they're a little bit
Hmm.
flawed. And sometimes they're oblivious to that flaw. And I wanted John Roby to be somebody who was exactly what you said, and oblivious to their
Hmm.
faults, because they're living it and they're such a good person, they don't really see how they come across sometimes. And I really wanted to portray that. That was the basis from which he
The
grew.
the scene where Francie tells him you're a selfish man and you don't treat other people like people, and him immediately going, but she's wrong. Clearly, what does she mean? And he starts rationalizing it. Again, it makes the
Yes.
characters real people, which when you have heightened situations, heightened places, I feel like easily again, like I love James Bond books, but let's face it, James Bond is a character. Very often the nuance is immediately dropped off the face of the planet because we need them to be big and bombastic rather than
Yes.
actually reacting to situations the way that people do. And the way that he just instantly starts to process and self-justify, it makes him resonate as a person in the story.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, again, great job catching that. I think in literature, if you're writing fiction, they often say, um, you want to you for the character to grow, you have to attack their
Hmm.
belief system, right? And I look at plot lines as opportunities to give those characters a chance to grow. So I'm thinking about myself. I am far from a perfect person. So, I think about it when people challenge me, like, oh, you're this or you're that. My first instinct is to defend myself and rationalize my behavior. But if it happens a little bit, a little bit, a little bit more, you have to listen, and that's kind of what I wanted Roby to do. And towards I would say the 3/4
Hmm.
mark, you want to see a character really like almost fall into chaos
Hmm.
because their belief system is crumbling around them. So that's exactly what I had hoped to do. I'm glad you caught that. You're good.
I love good books, and I tell you what, again, To Catch a Spy. So, for the audience, you sent me the digital copy to read, and instantly within like five, I was like two chapters in, and I'm like, this book is amazing. I need to actually have it on my shelf
Oh, I
because
love it.
it's a great page turner. You didn't write super long chapters usually. They do a good job of being the scene and keep pushing the
Yeah.
story forward with various characters' points of view, with most of it being from John's or Francie's. Just so that the audience knows what's
Yeah.
the general plot of To Catch a Spy, besides it's To Catch a Spy.
So the general plot is it picks up a year after the events of To Catch a Thief. And at the end of To Catch a Thief, we saw John Roby and Francie Stevens sort of entering into sort of a relationship, right? There was mutual attraction. So in my book, To Catch a Spy takes place a year later. You've got John still living at the Riviera. Francie had moved back to the United States. How and they kind of had contact for a while, and then using current terms, she
Yeah,
ghosted him. I don't use that in the book because it's the
good choice.
1950s, but she just kind of cut him off. And so, but Francie is coming back to the Riviera as a model for Fashion Week. So John hopes to rekindle that romance, but Francie's got a couple of surprises for him. Now, while John is waiting for Francie to arrive, he stumbles upon an espionage ring. And as those two plot lines intersect, the espionage ring and Francie's return, John becomes haunted by a question: is Francie a spy?
Mhm.
So that's about all I can
That's
say.
a great summary. I, again, can't say how much I adore this book because you use the Riviera elements perfectly. The use of Fashion Week was brilliant because, again, we're in this lush location and the use of fashion, like, not to, I'll give you a good Ian Fleming comparison here. Fleming usually tied
Okay.
his plots to a commodity or a concept or a thing, like the gold, diamonds. He picked a trade or a commodity that involved the British Empire. You have taken the
Oh,
fashion industry as like this thread that runs through the story that works so well with the characters and the plot. I give you a great deal of applause for that because it reads so beautifully. It features the characters so well, and it adds such a layer of texture in like a fabric sense to the story.
awesome. Wow. I, I am, you really are good, Terrence. I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking. Like, Alfred Hitchcock said about the original film, there were three stars: Cary Grant, Grace Kelly, and the
Yes.
Riviera, right? So the location becomes critical. And I wanted to stay at that location for this
Hmm.
book. And, and to me, that was always a very aspirational location. I mean, the French Riviera, it's only wealthy people go there, right? Yeah. Or I think I say in the book, it's either people who get served or people who serve
Hmm.
them, right? I mean, there's really like in my mind, there would be two societies, right? So I wanted to go there, but
Hmm.
why? And I thought Fashion Week would be a great background for that. It would capture the essence of what a lot of people held dear back then
Hmm.
at the Riviera, and also it allowed me to sort of flesh out the other plot
And to
lines.
your point on the people who serve as well as the served, you do a great job of
Mhm.
having both sets in the story playing really key roles, and how much John,
Yeah.
again, just he effortlessly moves up the entire stratosphere of class in this story with no one questioning him at all. Everyone generally seems to like him, which again makes when Francie tells him he's a selfish a-hole so much better because yes, he's self-centered, but also you've seen him throughout the story. People like him. And when you're likable, it is really hard to go, wait, do I have flaws? But everyone loves me.
Yeah, yeah. It's invisible to him. But yeah, I think if you look at you've read the book.
Hmm.
Luca is his best friend, and I love the fact that Luca is basically a poor guy.
Hmm.
He's a barely holding, keeping it together, but he doesn't care. And then on the other hand, you've got John socializing with, mother
Hmm.
Maud Stevens, right? Francie Stevens, her daughter, and they are super wealthy people. John's best friend in the first book was Paul Dupree, who was like French royalty. So he can move between Luca and Vittoria, right? Equally like Luca, or Francie and her mother,
Hmm.
like without batting an eye. And I've always admired that about people.
Okay, one thing also I took away from the book that I really wanted to touch on in our conversation. Reading it, it feels like it is of its time. Not in the way where you read something and go, ooh, that's cringy because you clearly know that whoever wrote that lived in a different time. This just has that kind of well-written energy of a good story that has a timeless feel to it, like the original To Catch a Thief. So I'm curious how much of that was intentional from the start to try echoing the same vocabulary of the time, or how much of it was just when you wrote it, this is how it came.
Oh, it was intentional. I can tell you. So, and mostly it reflects in
Hmm.
dialogue in the book, right? You can see how they speak, and I tried to keep it close to how they spoke back then. There's a couple of examples, like one, my grandfather was a super athlete. He was a professional boxer, a
I
state
have to ask, was this
champion
the
wrestler,
Italian or the Irish?
Italian side, and he never referred to working out. He called it
Hmm.
training. He trained all the time. And even when he was weightlifting, he was training. So I remember that, but also, things like, what clothing do you wear when you're
Hmm.
training or working out? I apologize. There's a lightning storm going on over here. So you hear some
The
big
echoing
booms.
thunder is God's approval of your book.
I hope so. But anyway, I was very purposeful about
Hmm.
that. Also, when I told my family, my wife, and we have a son and daughter, they're adults, they have children. I told my daughter what I was doing, and she's, listening. And then she said, today men don't save women.
Mm.
Like, ooh. And I'm like, well, tell me more, And she's like, there are no damsels in distress
Yes.
today. Men don't save women like they did back then.
Hmm.
Just keep that in mind. I was like, okay, I think I understand that. And she made the point, your readers live
Hmm.
today, even if you're writing a story about then. And that was just, wonderful to hear. Like, it really opened my eyes.
It is fascinating how you have to straddle that lens of you want to write something that honors the time and place of the original, while at the same token being something that someone today reading it wouldn't find it. They wouldn't have to overcome biases, or they could just read it with their lens without having. And
Yes.
again, to your credit, I think that you did a good job writing a book that stands independently, where it's helpful to know To Catch a Thief, either the film or the book. But really, you could just pick it up and read a very satisfying mystery where you're introduced to the characters well, they're instantly fully realized people, and you don't have to have any prior experience with the world or the people.
That's true. That's very true. I wanted to purposely do that. A lot of books people pick up in a series. Like, I remember, I love John
Hmm.
Connolly, the Charlie Parker books, and I remember I picked up The Black Angel, and I read it for the first time. I got it, and it was great as a standalone. And I kind of figured out what was happening before, but I went back and I've read all his books since
Hmm.
then. But I wanted to be a standalone, so what I did was just mention a character, and if they were in the prior story, just a brief, like a sentence of what they
Hmm.
did, not too much exposition. You know, I, I also believe in letting the reader fill in the
Yes.
blanks.
It makes such a difference.
It really does. I think, like, I don't know if you caught this, but I try, like Francie
Hmm.
Stevens, Grace Kelly played
Hmm.
her. I mean, there's a lot you can say about her appearance, but I think I purposely went out of my way not to mention
Yes.
what she looks
Okay,
like.
so I did note that because as we were as because you describe like her getting into these different gowns and stuff, I was waiting for, okay, is he going to describe her looking like Grace Kelly? Because that's a valid question. When there's because
Yeah,
again, you had a huge task ahead of you in that you are writing this story with the people who portrayed these characters in a very famous movie being Cary Grant and Grace Kelly. Those are
yeah.
directed by Hitchcock. These are like three huge looming specters in the course of trying to write a story. And I was just curious how much of that was in mind as you were writing it.
Oh, all of it. I mean, I was terrified at first. You know, I have the rights to write sequels to the
Hmm.
book. However, millions more people saw the film by Hitchcock than read the book. And the book is
Hmm.
wonderful, the first book. I think it's wonderful. I mean, it hooked
David
me,
Dodge
made me a lifelong
is an
fan.
underappreciated writer of the 20th century, in my opinion. One of the most.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he really is. The guy, I mean, his talent was immense. You know, he was one of those California noir
Hmm.
detective writers like Dashiell Hammett or Raymond Chandler, but he was also a famous travel
Hmm.
writer. And you don't often put those together, but that shows how talented that guy was. You know, there's a funny story, Terrence. He was, as a travel writer, he had rented a house in the French
Hmm.
Riviera. And he took his family on sort of an overnight trip one day. That same day, that night, the villa next door to his house was robbed by a cat burglar. So the cat burglar climbed a tree, scaled the wall of the house, got onto a balcony, and robbed everybody in the house, which included the two famous Elsas of the time. Elsa Schiaparelli, right? Schiaparelli, the fashion designer, and Elsa Maxwell, the gossip columnist. So that was big
Hmm.
news. And when Dodge returned from his trip, he was immediately detained by the authorities. And as he said years later, you know, they took one look at him and realized he's no cat burglar. Um, but those events inspired him to write this. And he actually said it was the easiest 80,000 words he'd ever written. And I can see why. I mean, it just flows the story.
It is shocking that there hasn't been a sequel until now. Like, because he wrote the Al Colby series that's like, I think at
Yeah.
least 4 or 5 books.
The Match, I think, was one. Yeah. Yes, you're right. I was shocked by that too. And, you know, I wondered, like, what's that about? So when I first when I decided I wanted to write
Hmm.
something, I learned how to write. That took about a year, and then I practiced it. Then I thought, well, what am I going to write
Yeah.
about? And I had always loved this. So I thought, I don't know of any
Hmm.
sequel. You know, there's been a couple of weird remakes or, like television shows that were remade but never a sequel. So I reached out to the publisher at the
Hmm.
time, and he took my call. Told me I don't believe there's any sequel, but I know a consultant to the estate of the original author, and he's an expert in David Dodge writings. So he put me in touch with that
Hmm.
guy, wonderful guy, and he told me no, never a sequel. And I pitched an idea,
Yeah.
like I told you about the moving into espionage, and he put me in touch with the estate of David
Oh, that's so
Dodge.
cool.
So yeah, I mean, it was just a couple of bank shots,
Hmm.
and so I had a conference call with the estate. They also brought Curtis Brown, the literary
Hmm.
agency, because they managed David Dodge's writings.
Hmm.
They were originally David Dodge's
Hmm.
representatives, right? So they still have that role. So they were on the call. I mean, I was terrified, literally shaking. And I had to pitch them both my idea, right? And they're intrigued,
Hmm.
and they said that it sounds very
Hmm.
interesting, a good direction to go. Why don't you write the first 30 pages of the book you want to write? So that was my interview. And I mean, the first 30 pages are the hardest
Yes.
of any book. You have to really establish the hero, the protagonist,
Hmm.
hopefully in a moment that's core to
Hmm.
them. You have to establish the big drama, right? The big conflict that's going to happen. You want to establish the place and develop that a little bit. And if you can tee up their growth as a character, you want to do that
Hmm.
too. So, but most importantly, you cannot lose a reader,
Yes.
not ever, right? Some people say the first chapter, the
Hmm.
first paragraph, or the first
Hmm.
sentence. So, I mean, I have to tell you, unbeknownst to them, I had written like a good part of the book already. But I rewrote those first 30
Hmm.
pages probably 40 or 50
Hmm.
times in a
Oh,
month.
wow.
That's all I did. Yeah, and then I sent that to them and they loved it. So
I,
the rest
I
moved
mean,
on.
I believe it because, like I said, I made it through probably the first 30 pages and I was like, this book is amazing. Like, again, it, it sets up the world, it sets up the characters, it does exactly what those pages need to do. More importantly, it, so I read a lot, which means there are some times where I read something, I'm like, yawn, I've seen this before. If it gets too generic. But
Yeah,
I read a lot and I read this and was like, this is so refreshing. It's deliciously the things that I want from this kind of story, while at the same token
yeah,
being different enough that I don't feel like I'm just getting the same thing again. So, one
yes.
other thing I have to give a huge shout out is for people that are just listening, they can't see the cover, but To Catch a Spy has a kick-ass cover. Um, I think that this was the other reason that I was like instantly drawn to is you have like this I assume this is John Roby is the silhouette and the
Yeah.
first suit up logo has just like the dude in the silhouette and I was like, hey, looky there.
That's funny. They say there are two things that really sell a book, really three, word of mouth, but two things right off the bat. The design, the cover design, and I think Source Books, Poison Pen
Hmm.
nailed it with that. Like I said, Hitchcock said 3 stars. All three are on that
Hmm.
cover, right? You can see Francie Stevens, John Roby, and the French Riviera in the background. So that part was nailed. And the other thing was the blurbs,
Hmm.
like endorsements from established authors. You know,
And you
um,
guys got some really
that
good
and that's
ones here.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I was lucky. It's interesting. Like as a debut author, I don't know any
Hmm.
writers. I knew none, but I had also read I have to start, create a social media
Hmm.
presence at least a
Yeah.
year before my book comes out. So I did. I bought a
Hmm.
website, tocatchathief.com,
Again,
and I
congratulations
started.
on getting that site. By the way, when I first saw tocatchathief.com, I was like, I am amazed that he was able to get that. That is so awesome.
Oh, that took 4 years, just so you know. I mean, when I first wanted it, it was 4 or 5 times what I eventually paid for it. But I thought it would be
Hmm.
great, but then I registered other ones like
Yeah.
tocatchathief.org, you know, and I said, look, I really don't need this site. All of a sudden, price came down a day later and I bought it. But you need to have that, right? And then I also set up
Hmm.
a Twitter account. John Roby is back,
Hmm.
right? Now I started following authors that I liked. And I never had social media until recently. I found what I loved is following people in their journey, whatever it is, offering
Hmm.
encouragement, commenting on things that they do. It's just fun. And that's what I started doing with some of these writers. And a couple of them offered, hey, if when your book comes out, if you want me to read it, and I'll give an endorsement if I
Hmm.
like it. Yeah, that would be wonderful. So, I met Alana I.S.
Hmm.
Berry, who wrote The Peacock and the Sparrow. She offered and she provided a blurb. Then got to know Brian Freeman. He does all the Jason Bourne books. He
Hmm.
does a Jonathan Stride mystery series, a detective series, and standalone books. And he and I were emailing each other yesterday. I had a couple of questions for him, but I follow these folks, and I
Hmm.
and I just sort of I like what they do. It's fun for me to see what they're doing. And it's not just them, it's any writer that I think is interesting. There's a woman in England, right? The
Hmm.
UK. She's an author. Her name is Lorna
Hmm.
Hunting. I like her books a lot. but she is probably the most interesting woman I've come across. Her interests are out there. Like she loves medieval tiles and metal objects. And I just find that fascinating. Like she's a phenomenal
Hmm.
writer. She's got another career and she has really cool interests. So I follow her. I comment on things. But Harlan Coben gave us that blurb on the front
Hmm.
cover, right? And I've never met him in my life. But my brother, I have a brother who's very successful. He plays golf with Harlan. So and he is so generous. And he said, he was telling Harlan about me writing this book. And I guess Harlan was a big fan of To Catch a
Hmm.
Thief. So he said to my brother, when your brother's book is ready, I'll read
Hmm.
it, which is code for if
Yep.
I like it, I'll endorse it. So, and then when it came time for that, there was a little bit of I made a few errors and the publisher made one or two, mostly me. And we only had 3 weeks to get these endorsements.
Hmm.
So I mailed it to Hart. Now, to this day, I've never spoken to the guy. I've just
Yeah.
emailed him and I copied the editor on the email. And I did that all the time so that if I got
Hmm.
so we both got the work, so they wouldn't question me. But I sent it to him. Now, this guy, in the hierarchy of blurbs, my understanding is J.K. Rowling, number one, right? If you can get something from her, unbelievable. Next is Harlan Coben. Then you have like Kristen Hanna, James Patterson, all those folks, right? Tremendous. So I'm thinking this Harlan's an entertainment conglomerate
Yeah.
now. Like being a writer is one of the fewer things he does these days, although he still cranks out great books. He actually read it in 3 weeks and he liked it enough to give me that phenomenal
Hmm.
blurb. So I'm grateful for that. I'm actually grateful to him, Brian Freeman, I.S. Barry, Ava Glass gave me a nice. She writes the Alias Emma
Hmm.
books, and Lorna Hunting, who, I think she's an underappreciated author, but I asked her to give me a blurb, and she did, and it's
I'm
wonderful.
definitely going to seek out
So
her books now because again, this is part of the other thing that I really enjoy about doing this show is for me, it's fun as a reader and writer to the moment I see like something like this, I'm like, okay, I need the book, but then also, wait, I need to talk to the man that wrote this because there's a story there. And I'm always curious to know how we get from that idea to a finished book. And again, huge kudos to you. This is your debut novel, and you
mhm.
knocked it out of the park.
Thank you, Terrence. I feel good about that. I have written a second book. I have a contract with the estate to write exclusive
That's
sequels, right,
awesome.
or prequels to the book. So the second book is already done.
Yes.
It's been edited, and when I say it's been edited on my
Yeah.
side, right, myself, my wife, my daughter, she's an editor. She was an editor, so we edit, then we send it to the
Yeah.
publisher.
That's a great way of being able to have that. I always say creativity never happens in a vacuum. There's always some degree of dialogue. Being able to have that somewhat in-house is really cool. One thing that you had mentioned, you teased me about when we first started emailing back and forth about scheduling this is Vittoria. Tell me how that character came about.
So, okay, so in the book, To Catch a Spy, I created a character named Vittoria. Now, in the first book, John Roby sort of has to hide out in Italy for a while. So, in this book, I created Vittoria. And as I describe her, she's Italian, muscular, bit of a hothead, very sexy, and very
Hmm.
dangerous, right? So, when Sourcebooks, Poison Pen, sent me the editorial letter, which is your first big touch point with a publisher, they mentioned that they loved Vittoria. And so I wrote back and said, I'm so glad, I've been around strong women my whole life. For example, my wife, Victoria, who is Italian, muscular, a little bit of a hothead, very sexy, and very dangerous. Now, having said that, I have to read a disclaimer. Um, yeah, I feel like a co-host on The View, but I have to say, oh, hold on, please hold. I have to do this. Okay, the characters and events portrayed in this book are fictitious or are used fictitiously. any similarity to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental.
Yes.
But I think people get the
Yeah.
point, So, and everybody who knows Victoria comments on that. In fact, one of our friends said, "You misspelled her name." Also, Terrence, along those lines, I thought this was funny. We live in a nice neighborhood in Bluffton, South
Hmm.
Carolina. And my wife was out walking one day, and a car pulls up. It was her friend. And she says to Victoria, "Hey, I love the book. How does your husband know how we women think? How does he know us so well?" Victoria looks right at her and goes, "It's fiction." So she's a little dangerous.
That's awesome. Again, it's part of the fun when creating characters, you can just play with the composites and the elements. It's such a wonderful way to pay homage while at the same time just creating someone that's memorable and fun. Like, this, the
Yes.
side characters sometimes are the most freeing thing for a writer because you have your protagonists in this mold that they have to you already have the arc set for the protagonists. They need to make their
Yeah.
thing and they'll surprise you time to time, but it's the side
Yeah.
characters that you introduce or move around through the story that they have less of a static position or track that you're moving them on, that all of a sudden
Yeah.
they light up and you're like, oh, I didn't expect that. That's wonderful.
Yeah, like, for me, it was Vittoria and
Hmm.
Luca, like, those to me, I've always loved ensemble
Yes.
casts, whether it's books or TV shows, just love them. And, because it's fun to follow over
Hmm.
time. So, I'm glad you like Vittoria. I think that's cool. Luca's cool. Also, the character for me that I really liked was Mother.
Hmm.
I think she was played by Jessie Royce
Hmm.
Landis in the original film, but I really like that character. I think there's a lot of depth to her that's unexplored. So in the first book, I kind of bring her back, show dimensions of her personality. In the second book, I think she takes on
Ooh.
more of a prominent role.
I'm very excited to see this flourish as a full series because, again, I think that the world and the characters, and to your point, the period, that time period is so rich for narrative soil. Like, there's a lot you
Yes,
can do with the way the world is shaping at that time. There's
yeah,
I think, again, I like that you use, so the French Riviera has that wonderful vibe to it that I'm excited to see
yeah.
how if it continues and how so as potentially characters move around. I'm very excited to see what comes up in future installments. But one of the other questions I wanted to ask is, so debut novel, do you have a writing routine? And if so, one of my main questions is the writing routine you are on now different than the one you did for the first book?
Oh, yeah, it is. Yes, it is. And I do have a routine. So, as you know, with writers, and I've just found this out fairly recently, there's really two
Hmm.
schools. They call one the planners and one the pantsers, right? The pantsers kind of fly by the seat of their pants. They start writing, and wherever the book takes them, the narrative takes them, that's where they go. I can't write like
Yeah.
that. There's too much for me to track. So I'm a planner. I write by outline,
Hmm.
and I tend to write books in 25%
Hmm.
increments, right? So, but the other thing I do is not only do I plan and outline things. I mean, you've got to track
Yeah.
the plot lines, the plot points. I want to have major surprises that
Hmm.
just almost blow up the protagonist's world. And I try to do that 3 4 times in a book. But also those tie into the character
Hmm.
development. So I have to make sure I'm tracking all of that. All of the first 25% has to build to that moment
Hmm.
at 25%. And that's a rough
Yeah.
guide, right? So, but that's how I write. But the other thing I do is I very much write in an authentic
Hmm.
way. So what I mean by that is, I'm around these characters all day. They almost become real to me.
Hmm.
I know that's weird to say, but you're dealing with them, you're thinking
Hmm.
about them. So when I'm writing, I'm thinking, would he really do that in the next chapter after what just happened? Would she say that? I don't think she would.
Hmm.
So then I have to change the rest of the
Hmm.
outline.
I,
So,
I think of it
but
like
usually,
music, where when a false note happens, in a musical piece, you notice it. It's that discordant sound. The
Yeah.
same thing happens when a character does something that they wouldn't actually do. And then you go back and go,
Yes.
okay, let's.
Yeah, because I could tell if I'm reading, I could tell if the author
Hmm.
forced a character to say something just for the storyline. And I don't like that. I want it to feel natural. And it also makes those characters more
Hmm.
real. So Terrence, I used to be a toy
Uh-huh.
designer years ago, right? And I remember pitching a Barbie concept to Mattel. And I'll tell you, it was called Ballroom Dancing Barbie. It was a would not have worked, but it was a remote control for
Yeah.
girls, right? And Barbie was dancing around, and I remember the two executives from Mattel. They stopped the meeting, and the one looked at the other, and he said she would never do that. I'm like, who are we talking about? And it was Barbie. Like Barbie was real to
Hmm.
them as my characters are to me. I always remembered that, and it stuck with me. So, I want to make sure that those characters do, their personalities have formed
Hmm.
over that first book.
Yes.
They have to be
Hmm.
legit. They have to be. If they misstep, it's my fault. I try desperately to correct that. The editors at Source Books, Poison Pen, they do the same thing. But also the other thing is I usually get up relatively
Hmm.
early, like 5 o'clock in the morning. I mean, I used to get up much earlier when
Yeah.
I was actually working, but I get up early and my thing used to be I'm going to write for 3 hours, take a little bit of a break, maybe work out, go for a walk with
Hmm.
Victoria. Um, Lately, I'm finding I'm reading a lot of news in the morning.
Hmm.
And I was fighting that, like, come on, stop doing this. You're wasting time. But then I thought, I kind of like this, right? There's a couple
Hmm.
sports teams I follow, some headlines. So I'm thinking, okay, let me give myself 45 minutes
Hmm.
for that, and then I'll get to work. So that's what I've been doing. And some days, I'll write for 3 hours. Some days I'll write for six. But what I'm finding too is the social media
Yes.
aspect of being an author is really taking a lot more
Hmm.
time than I thought it would. But I kind of like it.
Hmm.
It's fun. Here, like I mentioned John Connolly, the
Yeah.
Charlie Parker books. I follow him on Twitter. That guy is amazing. But he does this thing, and I love it. He he writes about he's on a book tour right
Hmm.
now, and he writes about the hotel rooms he's staying in. I think that is so quirky, but so John Connolly. He posts things about music. He's big into music. The other author who I follow, one of the authors I follow, is Lisa
Hmm.
Scottaline. The Second
Yeah.
Plum books. During the football playoffs, she lives in South Jersey. She's a Philadelphia Eagles fan. During the playoffs, she had this cardboard cutout of Bradley Cooper, right? And so she called him Flat Bradley. And she and Flat Bradley would root for the Eagles and she would post on it. I thought that was hysterical and adorable. So she and I got to know each other a little
Hmm.
bit. John Connolly, he doesn't follow me, but I follow him. But he comments on things I say about his hotel rooms. So I like that part of social
Hmm.
media. There's also a part where I have to put out there events for
Yeah.
myself or what I'm doing or reviews I get. I have to do
Hmm.
that. And that's okay. But I am finding that the bulk of that takes a few hours a
Yeah.
day. And that's nothing I counted on.
Marketing a book is just as important as writing it, at least if you want to keep writing
Yes.
them. You've also been doing a really good job of doing in-person events and book signings. How's that going?
It's going well. I mean, I'm an introvert by nature, but I'm finding if I have to, I can rise to the
Hmm.
occasion. I'm selling a lot of books. Like whenever we go to a bookstore, I'm selling books. I did an event 2 weeks ago up in North
Hmm.
Carolina, Littleton, North Carolina, and it was at I think the Blue Jay Bistro, and a woman I know, Lori Judd, she interviewed me in front of like a women's
Oh,
club.
that's cool.
And there were men and women there, and she asked some hard questions, but I had so much fun, and I think it went well. And then I signed some books that people had bought, and I promised to come back next year and sign all the rest. But I do enjoy that, because the people you're
Hmm.
meeting, they're readers, and a lot of times if they're not interested in what you've written, even at a superficial level, they're not coming.
Hmm.
So I like that. I like talking about it, and I'm happy to be there. So I would say they're going well. I keep getting invited to do more and more.
That's great.
So I think, yeah, next Saturday I'm going up to Columbia, South Carolina, and I'm going to be interviewed again, and then we're going to do a book signing. And then I think in June I'm doing something back on Hilton Head Island. So I have to confirm the date. So I'm really enjoying it. I would do more if I could. I can. I just
Well,
would,
it becomes all
I
a
have
matter
to.
of time. Like that's the thing is trying to keep everything in balance so that the main thing stays the main thing while at the same time doing the ancillary things that support the main thing.
Yes, that's right. It's a tough balance. And Alana Berry, I.S. Berry said that to me. Like you've got to, you have one debut
Hmm.
novel and you have a limited window to promote that
Yes.
debut novel. So make sure you do that. And Brian Freeman and Nick Petrie, he writes the Peter Ash
Hmm.
books. He gave me phenomenal advice on how to conduct myself, what to think about. And I mean, they've been so helpful, these authors, because they've been through it before.
Yeah, it's again really neat when there is this shared sense of community that comes around it. Again,
Yes,
writers don't exist in a vacuum.
correct. Yeah, there's other writers out there, and readers aren't shy
Hmm.
either. They'll tell me what they love, they'll tell my wife, they'll tell me what they don't like, but I always ask if somebody says, "Oh, I loved your book." I always ask them, "What would you have wanted to see more of?
Mm.
What would you have wanted to see less
Hmm.
of?" You know, because that helps me become a better writer for the people that like the
Yeah.
books.
Is there anything that so far in terms of feedback you're hearing people want more or less of as a consistent thing?
Yes. Yeah, so I do hear they want more Victoria. So, but I thought that anyway. But the thing that kind of surprised me was a lot of people, enough. Like if one person says
Hmm.
it, I remember it. If two people say it, I log
Hmm.
it. If I hear it a third time, I've got to do something,
Hmm.
right? So the fight scenes were maybe a little bit too
Mm.
involved for some of the readers, maybe a little bit too long.
Hmm.
Um, my editor said, "Look, you've got to cut these back," and I
Hmm.
did. Still, they're probably a little bit too involved and long. And in my second book, I really tried to cut it back. And one like my wife Victoria said, "Still, you got to do more. You got to cut back a little more. It's a little confusing." And I get
Hmm.
that. Now, my brother, who knows Harlan Coben, he's an avid reader. He loves the fight
Yes,
scenes. Don't
that's the thing.
yeah. So I've got to figure out who are my
Hmm.
readers. I believe more women read mystery thrillers than men.
Fair.
So if that's the case, I have to really absorb that feedback. All feedback to me is a
Hmm.
gift, and if you don't see it that way, it's your fault,
Hmm.
right? Shame on you. If I'm getting feedback on a book that's in market, I'm the luckiest guy in the world.
Mark, I have desperately enjoyed To Catch a Spy, and I'm excited about all the future stuff coming down the pipeline. Where can people go to learn more about you and your work?
Oh, so I have that website, www.tocatchathief, that's all one word, .com. So if you go there, I have newsletters posted. I put one out a month, and those newsletters really talk about the research that I'm
Hmm.
doing for the book I'm writing. So I'm going to post one in a few days, and it's going to be about the next
Ooh,
book.
exciting.
And sometimes yeah, so you'll get a sense of where it's going to be located, and then I'll tell you it's going to be located on the island of Martinique,
Ooh, great
right?
choice.
Yeah, but the thread of all of this is France,
Hmm.
which from the original story, John Roby was an expat American living in France. France had a lot of colonies that turned into
Yeah.
territories or departments, and they were very exotic. So my thinking is I can locate stories at all those former colonies or territories,
Hmm.
which today, like, and think there's a lot in northern
Yeah.
Africa, there's South Pacific, right? French
Hmm.
Polynesia. There's some great locate. Vietnam was another one. Great locations where the cast of characters can go. So but they can go there and read the newsletters, and in every newsletter I'll have something like Martinique, Martinican culture, and then my world. Like, and in the first, when I was writing the first book, it was John's world, Francie's world, the Riviera, and my world. So I'm always going to have my world in there, and that's where, like, I'm very transparent about challenges I'm
Hmm.
facing, or how I'm processing things. Like, I think it's fun for people to understand. Just like I want them to see John is
Hmm.
human, they need to know that
Hmm.
I'm human. Decisions aren't easy. Like, there's a lot of trade-offs and a lot of different things happening.
Mark, again, thank you for coming on the show. This has been a blast. I'll link everything in the show notes along with a link to order a copy of To Catch a Spy and to follow you on all your socials. Thanks again.
Thank you, Terrence. I really appreciate you making this opportunity for me. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
I enjoyed it. All right. Take care.